Mighty ships all forward!
In November of 885 AD, watchers on the walls of Paris saw something that must have stopped their hearts. Ships, hundreds of them, filling the river from bank to bank, stretching back farther than the eye could follow. The Norse fleet sailing up the Seine that autumn was enormous by any measure. Contemporary sources put it anywhere from 300 to 700 vessels, carrying somewhere between 30,000 and 40,000 men. It was a force unlike anything France had faced on its rivers. The fleet was led by a chieftain named Siegfried, and possibly others. These weren't opportunistic raiders swooping in for a quick score. They came organized, provisioned, and patient. They had siege equipment. They had a plan. And their plan was simple. Take Paris, or at the very least, use it as leverage to pass upriver into the richer territories of Burgundy beyond. They sent a messenger ahead to demand safe passage. The man who answered that messenger was not the king. Odo was not royalty. He was a Frankish nobleman, the son of a count, a military man who had been given responsibility for defending the Ile de la Cité, the island in the middle of the Seine, where Paris was concentrated at the time. When Siegfried's messenger arrived demanding the fleet be allowed to pass, Odo refused. He told the messenger that the city had been entrusted to him, and he could not hand over what wasn't his to give. Passage was denied. Siegfried, by one account, responded with something between frustration and genuine puzzlement. He warned Odo of what was coming. He wasn't threatening so much as stating a fact, the way you might warn someone that it was about to rain. The Vikings attacked the next morning. Paris at this point consisted primarily of the island and 2 bridges, connecting it to either bank of the Seine. Those bridges were the whole game. As long as they held, the fleet couldn't pass upriver. Odo had reinforced them with towers at each end, small fortifications that could be defended by a handful of men. The entire defense of the city rested on whether those towers could hold. The first assault came in waves, arrows, and fire, and direct assault up the bridge approaches. They had crossbows, which the Norse hadn't fully anticipated. They poured boiling oil and hot pitch down onto men trying to scale the towers. They dropped beehives, which sounds almost comical until you imagine what it actually meant for the men below. They held through the day and into the night. The Vikings pulled back and regrouped. This pattern repeated for weeks. Siegfried's forces tried everything. They built siege engines, catapults, and battering rams constructed from timber taken from the surrounding countryside. They launched fireships, boats packed with burning material, floating them downstream toward the bridges to try to destroy them. Some of the bridges caught fire and were damaged. One of the smaller bridge towers was eventually cut off and overwhelmed, its defenders killed. But the main structure held, and Odo held with it. The Norse settled in for a siege. Months passed. The Vikings established a camp on the north bank, a semi-permanent settlement of tents and longhouses thrown up around the besieged city. They raided the surrounding countryside for food and supplies, burning villages, stripping the land bare. The Franks outside Paris had no effective response. The kingdom was fragmented. The emperor, Charles the Fat, a descendant of Charlemagne, with all of his ancestors' name recognition and almost none of his capability, was occupied elsewhere and slow to act. Inside Paris, conditions were hard, but not yet desperate. Odo proved himself not just a defender, but a leader. He organized the rationing. He maintained morale. He led sorties out to harass the besieging forces, sometimes fighting personally in the kind of close, brutal combat that medieval warfare required. There are accounts of him being essentially a one-man rally whenever the walls looked like they might break. Spring came, then summer. The siege had lasted longer than anyone expected, and still, Paris stood. At one point, Odo slipped out of the city with a small group of riders to personally beg Charles the Fat for relief. Charles sent a small force that was ambushed and destroyed. Charles the Fat finally arrived with a significant army in the autumn of 886, nearly a year after the siege had begun. He had the numbers to challenge the Norse forces in the field. His commanders wanted to fight. His men wanted to fight. The Parisians, who had held their city for 12 grinding months on courage and boiling oil, certainly wanted someone to fight. Charles negotiated instead. He paid Siegfried's forces 700 pounds of silver to lift the siege. Then, in perhaps the most insulting strategic decision in the entire affair, he granted the Norse fleet permission to sail upriver into Burgundy to raid, which was exactly what they had asked for at the very beginning. The people of Paris, who had just survived a year of siege to prevent precisely this outcome, watched the Viking fleet sail past their walls with imperial permission. The rage was palpable. Charles's reputation never recovered. He was deposed within 2 years. The man who rose from the rubble of that political collapse was Odo. His defense of Paris had made him the most respected military figure in Francia. When Charles the Fat was removed from power in 888, the Frankish nobles needed a king who could actually lead them. They chose Odo, the count who had held the bridge. He was the first non-Carolingian king of West Francia, a genuinely new kind of ruler, one who had earned his position not through bloodline, but through demonstrated competence. It didn't last. The Carolingian dynasty clawed its way back eventually, and Odo's line didn't hold the throne permanently. But the precedent had shifted. Power in Francia was no longer purely about who your grandfather was. It was about who could actually protect people. The Vikings, for their part, got their silver and their raiding rights and sailed on. Siegfried had failed to take Paris. He probably didn't consider it a disaster. He'd been paid, which was often the point. But the siege had consequences nobody planned for. It broke an emperor. It made a king. And it planted a seed in the Frankish political world. The idea that a man who defended his people deserved to lead them. That would slowly, over generations, reshape how power worked in Europe. Paris held the bridge. Everything else followed from that.